They won the World Cup, then they lost the room, the whistle went, the trophy was lifted, and for about 90 seconds football forgot to be football. That's the part nobody talks about enough, not the scoreline, not the extra-time winner. The 90 seconds right after, when a World Cup final turned into something that looked less like sport, and more like a car park scuffle outside a nightclub. And in the days since, one by one, the biggest names in the game have stopped choosing their words carefully and started saying exactly what they think. Line up everything they've said, and it doesn't read like a bunch of scattered hot takes anymore. It reads like a verdict. So let's not start with my opinion. Let's start with theirs, the players, the managers, the pundits, even the man who got grabbed by the throat. Because what they're describing isn't a temper flaring for a second. It's a pattern. And that pattern is now sitting on a disciplinary panel's desk with real suspensions attached to it. What actually happened, quick recap, because the aftermath only makes sense if you remember the trigger. The final went to extra time. One team won it by a single goal. And in the chaos of the final whistle, one side celebrating, the other side gutted, control disappeared. A shove turned into a grab turned into a hand around a throat. Players who'd spent 120 minutes marking each other suddenly weren't playing football anymore, they were restraining each other. A coaching staff member ended up in the middle of it too, hands on an opponent's neck, caught clean on camera. Most of the losing side then turned their backs during the trophy lift. That's not a rumor. That's the footage. And it's why the sport's governing body has now opened a formal case with real sanctions on the table, not a slap-on-the-wrist fine, actual match bans that could follow players into qualifiers and future tournaments. The legends didn't hedge. Here's the thing about hearing this from someone who's actually stood in a World Cup final. It hits differently. A player who has genuinely lived that exact pressure, final whistle, biggest stage, emotions running molten, said something simple and hard to argue with. You can lose your head for a second, that's human, but the respect has to survive the loss. He wasn't cruel about it. He didn't call for blood. He just said, plainly, that if the reports of what happened are accurate, suspensions wouldn't surprise him at all. And that's the detail worth sitting with. Not a rival, not someone with an axe to grind, but a man who's been in that exact cauldron, saying the punishment is coming and it's earned. Someone else with zero patience for nuance put it in 2 words. Ban them. His logic was blunt but not unreasonable. If players walk away from this thinking it's fine, you've just told every team on the planet that this is how you're allowed to behave when you lose a final. Though even he couldn't resist adding the cynical part, everyone was quietly thinking that the people in charge usually find some soft landing that doesn't actually cost anyone anything. Keep that thought in your back pocket. It's the whole story, really. Then you had one of the game's most fearless personalities say, only half joking, that if he'd been out there watching one of the grabs happen, his instinct would have been to get involved himself, red card and all, and that the players standing around watching a teammate get manhandled should be embarrassed they didn't step in. Strip away the theater in that comment, and the message underneath is identical to everyone else's. What happened on that pitch was bad enough that a Hall of Fame-level competitor's gut reaction was to physically intervene. Even the commentary booth, live in the moment, didn't sugarcoat it. One analyst described watching someone throw 2 or 3 real punches. Another summed the whole thing up in 2 words, disgusting behavior. Even the winning manager wouldn't let it go. This is the part that should really tell you something. The manager of the team that won didn't spend his victory tour gloating. Days after lifting the trophy, he was still publicly calling the other side's conduct intolerable, pointing out, almost with disappointment, that it came from players he genuinely rated. He made a point of praising his own squad for staying composed while being provoked. When the winning coach would rather talk about restraint than bask in the win, that tells you which side actually crossed the line. And the young stars on the winning side clearly felt they'd won the argument too, not just the match. At the victory parade, the breakout teenage star of the tournament was photographed laughing and holding up a fan-made sign mocking the whole brawl, comparing it to a pay-per-view boxing event. That's not a team that feels shaken by what happened. That's a team so unbothered they turned it into a joke on an open-top bus in front of 1 million people. Quick pause, because this is the part worth thinking about while you keep reading. If you've made it this far, you already care more about accountability in sport than the average highlights. Only fan does. So here's a genuinely useful ask. Drop your own verdict in the comments before you finish the piece, hard ban, or let it go. Because the split in the replies on this story has been almost 50/50, and it's more interesting than any hot take I could give you. Then come back for the part where the only person defending the aggressors turns out to be one of their victims. It's the strangest twist in the whole story. The loudest call for punishment, not everyone thought a standard ban was enough. One former striker turned pundit argued the punishment needs to be big enough that nobody ever tries this again. You're allowed to be furious about losing, he said, but you stay classy in defeat. And if someone wants a fight, there are places for that, and a World Cup pitch isn't one of them. He was particularly disgusted watching a 21-year-old get thrown to the ground, calling the player responsible a coward, and said if it were up to him, he'd ban that player from an entire tournament, not just a few matches. That's a far heavier sanction than the disciplinary code's minimum, and it tells you how much anger one specific incident generated. The twist nobody saw coming, and then the plot twist. The one person who didn't want anyone banned was the player who got hauled to the ground himself. Asked directly whether the offending players should be suspended, he said no. He admitted it was a bad look, especially for kids watching, and that there's an uglier, more physical side to the sport that people forget exists. But his actual argument was simple. If the referee had sent the player off in the moment, that should have been the end of it. Punish it live on the pitch, and move on. Don't let a handful of ugly seconds define someone's career weeks later in a hearing room. That is a remarkably generous take from someone who was literally on the receiving end of it. And it deserves to be taken seriously, because it's genuinely the strongest counter-argument in this whole story. Handle it with a red card in real time, then let it go. Whether you agree with him or not, it's the fairest voice in this entire saga, which makes it almost embarrassing that it had to come from someone on the other team. Because it sure didn't come from the team that actually did it. The real story isn't the brawl, it's what came after. Here's the part the legends kept circling back to, and it's the part that actually matters more than 90 seconds of chaos. The total absence of anyone saying sorry. In the days after, as the entire football world weighed in, the accused side said almost nothing that resembled accountability. The player at the center of the worst of it posted a long message about pride, love, and flying the flag. Not one word about grabbing anyone by the throat. Another player sent off in the final itself posted about the group's humility and commitment, zero mention of the red card or the chaos. Their manager defended the squad as warriors and dismissed critics as people who don't understand them, while insisting elsewhere that the team knew how to lose gracefully. Even the captain, arguably the greatest player of his generation, said nothing publicly about the brawl at all. A team accused of disgraceful conduct responded, almost to a man, by telling everyone how proud they were of themselves. There was exactly one exception. The assistant coach who'd been caught with his hands on an opponent's throat actually apologized, said plainly that he was sorry, that he'd rushed in, that his emotions got the better of him. It was the single genuine act of contrition from the entire camp. And even that fell apart under its own weight, because he couldn't resist adding a justification, claiming it was a reaction to something said to him, and insisting it was more of a shove than a punch. The opponent involved shot that down completely, telling a newspaper that anyone who excuses a punch with, "He said something to me first," probably isn't actually sorry, and that nothing had been said to him in the first place. So the one apology to come out of the entire saga arrived with an excuse baked into it, and the person it was aimed at rejected it outright on the record. Let's be fair about this, though this story has more than one layer, and flattening it wouldn't be honest. The accused team is genuinely one of the great sides of this era, and their manager's grief afterward was real. A letter about warriors, and refusing to give up reads like a man who actually loves his players. Losing a World Cup final produces emotions almost nobody outside that dressing room can fully understand. And remember, one of the actual victims of the brawl doesn't even want anyone punished for it. A lifetime ban was never realistic, and honestly, a heavy suspension over a few seconds of post-match chaos would be harsh. There's a completely defensible version of this where the referee sends someone off in the moment, the federation pays a fine, and everyone moves on. That's not a fringe opinion, it's the exact position of one of the people who got hurt. But here's why the story still lands where it lands anyway. The brawl on its own might have been forgivable as a heat-of-the-moment lapse. What isn't forgivable, and what every serious voice kept coming back to, is what happened after. You can lose control for a second. That's human. But the respect isn't supposed to disappear with it, and for days afterward it did. Backs turned during the ceremony. Pride and passion posts instead of apologies. The one actual apology arriving with a built-in excuse and getting publicly rejected by the person it was meant for. Where it's headed now, it's out of the player's hands and into the hands of the disciplinary process. Under the standard code for violent conduct and mass confrontations, sanctions start at a minimum multi-match ban and increase depending on each individual's role. And those bans could realistically bite into future qualifiers and tournaments, not just friendlies. This also isn't the only disciplinary matter open against this squad right now. It's stacked on top of a separate case tied to a political banner unveiled after an earlier match in the tournament. 2 open files, one summer. The catch is that no timetable has been given, and with no competitive matches for months, nobody actually knows when, or if, a suspension lands with any teeth. But the consequences are already spreading beyond any hearing room. One of Europe's biggest clubs reportedly walked away from a transfer target directly involved in the chaos, deciding his tournament, including the ugly scenes, did him no favors with a club that prizes composure over histrionics. That's the market delivering its own verdict, no prosecutor required. And a veteran World Cup winning goalkeeper from this same squad has since said openly he's weighing whether it's time to step away from international football altogether. A golden generation is fraying at the edges, and the ugliness at the final whistle is now part of the story of how it ends. So where does that leave it? Almost everyone with a genuine stake in the sport's credibility has landed in roughly the same place. What happened was indefensible. Real bans for the worst offenders would be entirely fair. And the only person arguing for leniency was, ironically, one of the people who got shoved to the ground. Think about how lopsided that actually is. The winning manager condemned it. The legends condemned it. The pundits condemned it. The transfer market quietly condemned it, and the single voice arguing for mercy belonged to a victim. The real question left standing is the one the two-word ban them guy put his finger on. Does the governing body actually have the spine to discipline one of the most marketable teams in the sport? Or does it find the soft, toothless compromise it's found before? We've seen that blink happen already more than once in this exact competition's history. The players told you the truth about what happened. Now we find out whether anyone in charge is willing to act on it. Hard ban like the two-word guy wants, or in-game red and move on like the actual victim wants. That's the real debate here, and it's closer than you'd think.